When you think about it, the changes that happen to humans in the first 2 decades of life are astonishing. We go from helpless newborns to independent, hopefully competent adults. The study of that journey with its physical, intellectual, social, and emotional changes is called child development theory. In this program, we'll present the big ideas from 15 leading child development theorists. Why study child development? Most importantly, because it gives practical guidance for teachers, parents, and childcare providers. It also helps shape public policies that support the nurturing of healthy children to become productive citizens. Plus, it helps us get to know ourselves better, how the children we were become the adults we are. Only in recent centuries have children even become the object of study. Childhood in itself is a relatively modern idea, emerging in the 1600s when an English philosopher named John Locke wrote that children were tabula rasa, blank slates whose experiences would shape their adult behavior and personalities. The French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who lived in the 1700s, claimed that children are born innately good and that they think and learn differently from adults. It was a radical idea in a time when most children were treated like mini adults. Put to work as soon as possible to help support large families who struggled to feed and clothe themselves. Children as young as 4 were sent up chimneys and down into mines, spaces too small for most adults. Others did farm work, worked 12-hour days in factories, textile mills, and canneries, or helped out at home making goods like clothing, toys, artificial flowers, and matchboxes. Unless your family was wealthy, you probably couldn't afford much of a childhood. Society and child development theory have changed a lot since then. Thank goodness. Let's look at some of the leading theorists and their ideas on how children grow, learn, and become adults. Let's begin with a name you're no doubt familiar with, Sigmund Freud. Freud developed a method called psychoanalytic theory. He believed every person was made up of 3 parts, the id, the ego, and the superego. The id seeks pleasure and tries to avoid things that bring pain. For a baby, the id wants food, cuddling, and attention, and wants to avoid hunger, wet diapers, and loneliness. The ego is the part of the person that starts to understand cause and effect. When the id wants something, the ego figures out how to get it. The ego also learns that some behavior results in bad consequences, which the id would like to avoid. Think of the superego as a more mature, grown-up ego. The superego considers family rules or society's laws and tries to balance them with what the id wants. For example, a child sees another child with candy, and the id wants some. The ego wonders, can I just grab the candy? But the superego, knowing right from wrong, says it would be wrong to take the candy. Freud's ideas became known as psychoanalytic theory. In his therapy sessions, he would encourage his patients to relive their repressed fantasies and fears. Psychotherapy helps free patients from their subconscious issues. Most psychologists and theorists since have based their own research on Freud's. Maria Montessori was the first woman in Italy to become a doctor. Her specialty was pediatrics, and she was especially interested in children who were labeled ineducable. Dr. Montessori based her teaching philosophy on the idea that every child has innate skills and talents. She believed that by guiding children with love, they would learn almost on their own. The Montessori method teaches children through hands-on activities with encouragement from adults. A teacher's main role was to observe and take advantage of what Dr. Montessori called sensitive periods, when the child's mind was particularly receptive to learning. Trying to force learning outside of these sensitive periods was, according to Dr. Montessori, difficult and frustrating for both child and teacher. In her view, looking naturally becomes reading, and touching naturally becomes writing. The Montessori method is still used today all around the world. Arnold Gesell was an American born and raised in Wisconsin. His work explored the question of nature versus nurture in child development, nature being your genetic makeup and nurture being the environment in which you grow. Gesell maintained that children develop in an orderly sequence, set by heredity or nature. He believed that no development would take place until the child was ready for it. What Gesell is perhaps best remembered for are his observational techniques. During his research, he used one-way mirrors and designed a special domed research enclosure to allow researchers to observe from all angles without being seen. Lev Vygotsky was a Russian psychologist, and though he lived at the same time as Gesell, his research led him to a different conclusion. Vygotsky firmly believed that nurture was more influential than nature on how children develop. Vygotsky developed a 5-step process of socio-cultural development. Step 1. Adults provide tools, modeling, guidance, interaction, and encouragement. Step 2. A child performs tasks under adult supervision. Step 3. Adults help the child divide tasks into smaller segments and assess the child's understanding. Step 4. Adults provide support or scaffolding that is necessary in a learning situation. Step 5. Adults guide a child into a new situation through transferring familiar knowledge to a new or unfamiliar task or situation.
Very good. 4 mice. Are you going to read a story to me?
Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist, was one of the first to take Freud's work in a new direction. Piaget believed there are 4 stages of human development, which he called the cognitive development theory. The first stage he called sensory motor. Sensory meaning that the 5 senses are being used to understand the world. Motor refers to using your muscles. In the sensory motor stage, the child only knows what she experiences physically. Piaget's second stage is pre-operational, where children start to learn by using language and mental images. They are still egocentric, but they start to broaden their understanding of the world and know there is more to the world than what they can see or touch.
16, 19, 17, 16. Wait, here we come. Is she hiding the pool? Now.
Next comes a concrete operational stage, where children really start to understand others' points of view. They start to understand logic, and they learn something called conservation. When you understand conservation, you understand when I take 3 balls of clay and mush them together, I still have the same amount of clay. The mass of clay has been conserved. The final stage in Piaget's theory is formal operational, where children really start using abstract thinking. They know the difference between right and wrong and recognize that there are many ways of looking at things. They see shades of gray instead of always viewing things as black or white. Rudolf Dreikurs was an American psychiatrist who believed that all misbehavior was a result of feeling isolated, causing a child to attempt to fit in through one of 4 ways. With attention, a child will act out to get noticed, even if it results in a negative response from the parent or teacher. With power, a child tries to take leadership role and tell others what to do. Revenge is when a child retaliates against the people who are not giving her the positive response she craves. And avoidance is the worst of all. This is when the child simply withdraws altogether, not showing any response to anything going on around her. Dreikurs did not believe in a reward and punishment system for dealing with misbehaving children. Instead, he suggested that parents allow the child to go through the natural consequences of their misbehavior. Erikson was a Danish psychologist who studied the works of Freud and Montessori and focused on the idea of identity. Erikson developed a timeline of psychological development with 8 stages. He said that if a person had difficulty with any of the stages, they would have a problem, which he called an identity crisis, later in life. Erikson identified specific social tasks that need to emerge in 8 stages for healthy development. The first is trust versus mistrust, shaped by a caregiver's responsiveness to the baby. When the caregiver responds to the baby's needs, the baby learns to trust that when he is hungry, he will be fed, and when he is cold, he will be warmed, and when he raises his arms towards an adult, he will be picked up and cuddled. Autonomy versus doubt comes when a child learns that he has power of his own. He learns to walk and talk and maybe to go to the bathroom by himself. He realizes he is his own person, not attached to his parents. Erikson's third stage is initiative versus guilt. This is when a child learns to do things independently. As the child succeeds at different tasks, he will start to take initiative to try more new things. If he does not experience success, he will start to feel there is something wrong with him and feel guilty for not being successful. Industry versus inferiority. This is where a child starts to recognize that his own actions affect how people treat him. So an industrious child will act in such a way that gets good responses from others. But children whose behavior does not get good feedback from the important people in their lives start to feel inferior to others. Identity versus role confusion gets sorted out during adolescence, when a child takes all the things that had happened to her in early childhood and hopefully develops a strong sense of identity. If the teenager can't do that, there can be role confusion, where attempts may be made to either fit in or to completely separate from others. If you're counting, you'll notice that we've only covered 5 of the 8 stages. The final 3 are dealt with in adulthood, so we'll skip those. Abraham Maslow was the first of 7 children born in New York to Russian immigrants. He developed his hierarchy of needs after studying the behavior of monkeys. He noticed that, for example, if a monkey was both hungry and thirsty, it would drink first. Some needs always take precedence over others. The most basic needs, which have to be met before anything else can happen, are the physiological needs. If we're starving, we only care about food. Once our basic physical needs are met, the next need in the pyramid is safety and security. If a person feels secure, the next need that can be addressed is the need for love and belonging. The 4th need in the hierarchy is esteem. Maslow included 2 types of esteem: what others think of you and what you think of yourself. The peak of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization, or the full realization of an individual's potential. John Bowlby was a British psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who thought that bonding was an essential part of child development. His attachment theory is based on the feelings a child has for her mother. Bowlby outlined 4 characteristics of attachment. Proximity maintenance is the desire to be near the people we are attached to. Safe haven is returning to the attachment figure for comfort and safety in the face of a fear or threat. Secure base describes the way the attachment figure acts as a base of security from which the child can explore the surrounding environment. Separation distress is the anxiety that occurs when the attachment figure, usually the parent, is absent. Many people believe B.F. Skinner is the most important psychologist since Freud. He developed a theory called operant conditioning, which he used in behavior modification therapy. Using the Skinner box he invented, Skinner did research with rats or pigeons. If the animal performed the correct action, pressing the bar or pecking a certain spot, it would be rewarded with food. Skinner used different types of responses in his research. The first is positive reinforcement. This simply means when the desired behavior occurred, something good happened. Negative reinforcement is when a negative thing is avoided by the desired behavior. Sometimes Skinner would set up the experiment so nothing at all happened, regardless of the behavior of the subject. If a rat presses a bar and nothing at all ever happens, eventually the rat will simply ignore the bar. Here's the most interesting finding of Skinner's research. It turns out that always rewarding the desired behavior was not the best way to ensure that behavior continued. The very best way to ensure that behavior stays constant is to intermix reinforcement with extinction. Apparently, the hope for a reward was the most powerful motivator. Dr. Benjamin Spock was a trusted pediatrician and best-selling author. His book, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Childcare, has been translated into 39 languages and is the 2nd best-selling book of all time after the Bible. The biggest thing that Spock did to rock the parenting world was to say to parents, you are the true expert on your own children. Never before had anyone made such a claim. He said that cuddling babies and showing affection to children would not spoil them, but would make them happier and more secure. And instead of adopting a one-size-fits-all rule in terms of everything from discipline to toilet training, he suggested that parents be more flexible and view their children as individuals. Perhaps what is most revolutionary is he even suggested that parenting could be fun. Lawrence Kohlberg was an American psychologist who pioneered work in moral development. Heavily influenced by studying the Holocaust, he studied psychology and taught at Harvard. Kohlberg was famous for researching how people solve moral dilemmas. The pre-conventional level is where children make decisions based on how it will affect them personally. Kind of a what's in it for me attitude. It's egocentric, and the child doesn't spend time thinking about how his decision will affect anyone else. The conventional level is found in adolescents and some adults. Decisions are made by comparing the options with what society says is right or wrong. At this level, you can understand extenuating circumstances and debate whether or not the rule should always apply. Kohlberg's highest level is the post-conventional level. At this level, everything is taken into consideration. T. Barry Brazelton is a pediatrician from Texas who has also written many child development books for parents. In 1973, he developed the Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale, or NBAS, which is now used in hospitals and clinics everywhere. Neonatal means newborn. Brazelton's assessment scale is used in the first 2 months of a baby's life. It looks at 46 different physical developments and neurological responses, basically checking how well the body and brain are working. Brazelton's NBAS is especially important for at-risk infants and their parents. The results help parents and caregivers know how best to take care of the infant. Baumrind is a clinical and developmental psychologist from New York, known for her research on parenting styles. She categorized parents into 3 groups. The permissive parent is one who lets children have an equal say in all decisions. The parent doesn't punish the child and accepts whatever behavior the child chooses. The authoritarian parent is pretty much the opposite of the permissive parent. The child has to follow every rule and gets no say at all in how the household is run. The authoritative parent is the happy middle. These parents talk with their children and listen to their opinions, but remain the final authority. Howard Gardner was influenced by Erikson, another psychologist working to further the work of Piaget. Gardner made a name for himself when he released his research findings on multiple intelligences. His theory challenged the commonly held belief that intelligence is one-dimensional and you either had it or you didn't. Gardner identified 7 different types of intelligence and believed that everyone had varying degrees of each of them, giving everyone a unique cognitive profile. His 7 types of intelligence are linguistic or word smart, mathematical or number reasoning smart, spatial or picture smart, bodily kinesthetic or body smart, musical or music smart, interpersonal or people smart, intrapersonal or self smart. Gardner later added additional types of intelligence to his list: naturalist, spiritual, existential, and moral. His message to parents is to help children develop their own gifts and type of intelligence.
Trees, what's this?
Water.
Yeah.
Theories of child development continue to evolve. Researchers and psychologists are always trying to find ways to understand how the human mind develops. They've studied each other's research and have built on each other's findings. As technology advances, we learn more about the brain and how it affects behavior. Not only is child development theory fascinating, but its purpose affects us all. Knowing how to raise healthier, happy children can help us build stronger families and better communities.